The motor of the small vessel groaned as it pushed through the choppy Atlantic waters. Above the swirling mist and crashing waves stood Eel Point Lighthouse, an iron-toothed relic from another century, rising from a rock like the last bone of a dead god's spine. Inside the boat sat three figures: Dr. Elise Harper, a marine biologist and team lead; Nolan Briggs, a reserve sonar technician with a quiet past; Wendy Tran, a marine geologist and skeptic of all things strange. They were here to study tectonic shifts detected under the seabed, activity no one could explain. The lighthouse had been decommissioned since 1954. Now it would serve as their base for 2 weeks. As they docked at the battered wooden jetty, the sky turned an unnatural shade of slate. A gull screamed, then silence. Dr. Harper felt it first. The oppressive weight of the island, the stone beneath her feet radiated a coldness that wasn't natural. Wendy laughed it off, calling it Ghost Island nerves. But Nolan's eyes lingered on the lighthouse. He had seen this place before, in dreams, in nightmares. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of rot and rust. Furniture had been left as if someone meant to return. A coat still hung on the rack by the door. The radio crackled to life once, then died again. And below all of it, at the very base of the lighthouse, was a sealed iron hatch, bolted shut with chains blackened by salt and age. No one mentioned it, but all three noticed it. That night, the wind howled like an animal circling something wounded. The lighthouse's upper rooms had been converted into makeshift living quarters. Narrow beds, outdated lighting, and rusting fixtures from the mid-20th century. Elise, Nolan, and Wendy moved in like strangers stepping into a preserved tomb. The air inside was thick, not just with moisture, but with a deep, settled stillness, the kind only time can create. That night the storm hit harder. Rain lashed the windows with surgical fury. Thunder rolled across the sea like the growl of something enormous, submerged. Wendy, always one to challenge superstition, cracked open a bottle of bourbon and joked about the island's haunted history while they ate cold canned stew. Did you know they used to keep prisoners in lighthouses like this during wartime? Some went mad, others just disappeared. Nolan barely touched his food. He kept glancing toward the spiral staircase that led to the lower mechanical levels. And beyond that, the sealed hatch. "Elise," he said suddenly, "there's something wrong with the acoustics here." "What do you mean?" He pulled out his compact sonar laptop, tapping through data. "Earlier, when we docked, I ran a few initial pings into the ocean floor, just to test the system. And I got a return signal from inside the island." Wendy smirked. "Like a cavern?" Nolan shook his head. "No, but not a cavern. It bounced like a hollow object, large, moving." No one laughed. After dinner, they split up for the night. Elise took the upper level near the old beacon room. Nolan stayed on the second floor. Wendy chose the room nearest the hatch, just to prove she wasn't scared. At 2:13 a.m., the entire lighthouse shuddered. Elise woke with a start. The glass in her lantern shook. She rushed to the window. No quake, no thunder. But the ocean looked different. It wasn't crashing or foaming. It was still, perfectly still, like a mirror stretched across eternity. Downstairs, Wendy sat upright in bed, blinking at the sound that pulled her awake. Drip, drip, drip. She turned on her flashlight. The sound was coming from her ceiling, and just beyond that ceiling was the iron hatch floor. She climbed up barefoot, the stone cold and sharp. At the hatch, the air smelled briny and metallic. And something else, decay. As her fingers neared the padlock on the chains, a low groan echoed beneath it. Not the shifting of old earth, not pipes. A sound like breathing, vast, distant but alive. She ran back to her room and didn't sleep again that night. The following morning was unnatural. The sky above Eel Point was clear, too clear. The sea reflected the stillness like a frozen sheet, and the air smelled faintly of metal and rot. Wendy, pale and irritable, confessed to hearing sounds beneath the hatch. Elise tried to reason it away. Maybe the tide, or a pressure pocket. But Nolan was already reviewing his sonar logs again. I recorded something around 2 a.m. He muttered, dragging a waveform back and forth on his laptop. Here, listen. He played the audio. At first it was a low-frequency hum, then a strange warble, then something else. A voice maybe, not words, just tones that mimicked the shape of human language, like something trying to learn how to speak. Where exactly did this bounce back from? Elise asked. Nolan pointed at a sonar map. Directly under the lighthouse, 30 meters down. There's a void, like a vertical shaft or chamber. It wasn't on the geological survey. Wendy leaned in. So, what? We're on top of some giant hollow tube. Number not a tube, Nolan said. It's spherical. They decided to investigate further. In the base of the lighthouse, they unlocked the equipment closet and found an old maintenance blueprint. It showed floors that no longer existed, rooms that were now sealed or collapsed. One route led from the generator room into a sub-basement beneath the main structure. Wendy, always the boldest, volunteered first. I'll go down. It's just an old stairwell, right? They pried open the rusted metal hatch behind the generator. The stairs were steep and slick, carved from old stone and iron. Mold clung to the walls, like skin. At the bottom, a door. Heavy, locked. Wendy pressed her ear to it. Knock, knock. The sound came from the other side. She stumbled back, flashlight shaking. Elise, there's something down there. Suddenly, the generator sputtered, and the lights in the tower flickered out. In the blackness, Elise could hear the sound again. Not from below, not from outside. It was echoing up through the walls, all around them, like voices in a well. The tower stood silent as stone. Without power, the team was trapped in twilight. The kind that makes shadows look deeper, shapes more uncertain. Elise lit an oil lantern she found in a wall cabinet near the beacon stairs. The wick flared to life, casting flickering light over the peeling paint and rusted metal supports. Wendy had locked the basement door behind her. Something knocked back, she whispered. I swear to God, Elise, something's in there. I believe you. Elise said softly, trying not to show her own fear. Nolan rechecked the wiring in the generator room, but the lines weren't just stripped. They were burned through, as if melted from within. No overload could have done this, he said. This was intentional. A thick fog rolled in from the sea, and the glass windows of the lighthouse fogged over. It was barely midday, but the outside looked like dusk. Then from above came the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the spiral stairs. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be any of them. Elise raised the lantern, and the flame fluttered. Is someone else here? Wendy called out, stepping back, her voice trying not to break. No answer, only the sound of another step, then another. The footsteps stopped just outside the door of their main room. Nolan grabbed the emergency flare gun and moved toward the handle. Silence. Nothing moved. He flung the door open. Empty. But in the dust of the hallway floor were footprints, bare, wet, not human. Each toe too long. The arch of the foot too curved, like something not meant to walk upright. Suddenly, a piercing wail-like cry erupted from beneath the lighthouse. So loud, it shook the windows, rattled the lanterns, and dropped Elise to her knees. She clutched her ears, vision swimming. Wendy screamed. Nolan held the wall to stay upright. It was a call, not random. A signal. And somewhere far below, something answered. The cry still rang in Elise's ears hours later. They didn't speak much that afternoon. Just whispers, as if raising their voices might wake whatever now stirred beneath them. Nolan sat in the corner, cross-referencing sonar spikes with seismic patterns. Elise scribbled frantically into her notebook, matching the rhythmic tones they heard with whale song, ancient maritime languages, even Morse code. None fit. Wendy stood near the sealed basement door, arms crossed, flashlight aimed downward. "I can't explain this," Nolan finally said. "The data's wrong. Whatever it is down there, it moved during the sound, shifted by at least 3 meters, but nothing should be able to move under solid rock like that." "It's not rock," Wendy said. "That chamber under us, it isn't natural." They had no choice. They returned to the locked door at the bottom of the stairwell. Wendy held the lantern. Elise carried the sonar box, now converted to portable mode, and Nolan, still pale, had the flare gun loaded and ready. The lock resisted at first, but finally gave in with a groaning snap. The door opened into a low, narrow tunnel, carved deep into the island itself. Not modern, not even industrial. Hand-cut. Moss grew up the sides, and old pictograms, scratched or burned into the stone, lined the ceiling. Shapes of elongated bodies, circles within circles, spiral motifs that seemed to move subtly as the lantern flame danced. "Are these cave paintings?" Elise whispered. "No," Wendy muttered, brushing one with her fingertips. "These are warnings." The tunnel sloped downward steeply, into heat and moisture. The deeper they went, the more they felt like they were descending into a lung. Each breath tighter, wetter. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber, a perfect sphere carved into black stone. In its center stood a stone monolith, no taller than a man. Smooth, silent, humming, not aloud, but in the bones. It was surrounded by chains, ancient and rusted, lashed to the walls, as if the stone had once been tied down. Wendy stepped closer, lantern high. That's when they saw it. Cracks, hairline fractures across the stone surface. Fresh. As Elise approached with the sonar, the box pulsed once, then died completely. And the monolith? It breathed in. The monolith exhaled. It wasn't air. It was pressure. A shift in atmosphere that pushed Elise back a step and killed the lantern flame in Wendy's hand with a gasp. Darkness swallowed the chamber for a full 5 seconds. Then the emergency backup on Elise's sonar unit sparked back on, casting a weak greenish glow. In its low light, the cracks across the monolith had widened. Something inside was moving. Nolan stared at it, frozen. "It's not a monument," he whispered. "It's a prison." "Or an egg," Wendy said grimly. The walls around them began to moan. A deep, bone-vibrating sound, like whale song, slow to an unbearable crawl. Elise raised her voice over the noise. "We have to go, now." But the way back was gone. Where there had once been a tunnel was now only stone, smooth and seamless, like it had never been carved at all. Number, that tunnel was right there," Nolan cried, rushing toward it. "We just came through it." He slammed his fist against the wall. Stone, cold and ancient. The chamber trembled, the walls flexing subtly, breathing. And then something began to emerge from the monolith. First a hand, long and too many jointed, pushing through the crack like it belonged to no natural creature. Then the outline of a shoulder, then a face, or what should have been a face. Smooth, blank, only skin, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a shivering, faceless head pressing forward like a newborn remembering the world. Wendy raised a flare gun and fired. A brilliant red light filled the chamber, and for a split second they saw its full shape. Tall, sinewy, with limbs slightly too long, as if it had grown in a world with different gravity. The creature flinched, not in pain, but in acknowledgement. Then it turned and looked at them, not with eyes, but with intent. It knew them. It remembered them from before. The red glow from the flare hissed and sputtered out, plunging them back into semi-darkness. But the faceless entity remained still, only inches from the broken monolith, its body gently swaying, like it was remembering how to stand. Its surface shimmered in the sonar glow, skin slick like kelp, but stretching and retracting across joints in unnatural waves. Every breath it took sounded like the ocean dragging something unwilling across a rocky shore. Elise whispered, "What does it want?" "I don't think it knows yet," Wendy replied, not taking her eyes off it. "It just woke up." Nolan knelt beside the sonar device, fingers trembling as he flipped through recorded pulse patterns. "There's a signal buried under all this. A memory imprint, audio from the past." He clicked play. A whisper crackled through the sonar. "It found us again?" They turned to each other in shock. That voice, it was Elise's, but distorted, aged, dying. "No, I didn't say that," she murmured. "Not yet." From across the chamber, the entity tilted its head, the faceless surface turning toward her as though hearing its name in a dream. A low groan escaped its throat. Not words, but recognition. Elise stepped backward instinctively. Then the walls of the chamber rippled, like sound waves over a pond. Ancient pictographs along the stone ignited, one by one, casting dim light over the chamber. The symbols weren't decorative. They were memories. One showed a ship, a lighthouse in the background, with crew members bounded lowered into a pit. Another showed the entity, chained, bleeding black echo, faceless but writhing. The last showed 3 people standing before it. And even in the crude lines, Elise could recognize herself, Wendy, and Nolan. "Impossible," Wendy breathed. "We've never—" "Yes," Elise whispered, "we will." The entity finally took a step forward, then another. And each time it moved, the stone around them forgot it had ever been solid. Tunnels reformed, walls dissolved, and memories, echoes, bled across their minds like voices from forgotten lifetimes. They weren't just inside the lighthouse, they were inside its memory. And the lighthouse itself was a seal, not just to contain the entity, but to contain time. The chamber twisted as the walls folded in on themselves. The entity advanced slowly, each movement causing the air around it to shudder, rippling the ground like the surface of a stagnant pond disturbed by something unseen. Elise's heart raced, and she stumbled back, only to realize there was nowhere left to go. The stone, the tunnel, even the floor beneath their feet, all of it had become part of something greater, something that remembered the island before it was built, before the lighthouse had even risen from the waves. "We need to get out," Nolan said, his voice strained, barely audible over the sound of the entity's movements. "This whole place is alive." Wendy glanced up at the ceiling, where the pictographs had now expanded, covering the entire curved surface. They were shifting, and as each new image appeared, Elise swore. She saw more and more familiar faces. Her own, her crew, and then others. Faces she didn't recognize. People trapped in a single moment, preserved by whatever was happening. Then it struck her. We're inside a memory prison. The wall shuddered again, and with it came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, but not from the entity. These were louder, heavier, more deliberate. There was something else down here. Something worse. Nolan turned frantically to the entryway. "We can't go back. The tunnels, it sealed us in." The low whisper returned through the sonar device, like a drowning echo rising from the depths. "It finds you." From the darkened recesses of the chamber, shadows stirred. Elise swallowed hard, gripping the wall for balance. What is it?" The shadows coalesced into shapes. Figures that seemed to emerge from the stone. Human shapes, but wrong, fractured, with limbs out of place. Their bodies seemed to be parts of something else. They stood at the edges of the room, watching, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if their forms hadn't fully taken shape yet. "Are those the others?" Wendy asked quietly, her voice shaking. "No," Elise breathed. "Those are what's left of those who tried to escape." Suddenly, the entity turned toward the newly formed shapes. As if acknowledging them, the figure shifted, melting into the air, and a terrible, alien sound erupted from deep within the stone. A scream. The last of the pictographs appeared above them. It was a warning, but not in any language they knew. "The lighthouse is the tomb of time." The walls cracked open as the stone began to move around them. They weren't just trapped inside the lighthouse. They were becoming part of it. The room became a whirlpool of memories. Each movement the entity made, each pulse from the monolith, sent a tremor through the chamber. The stone beneath their feet began to shift, rising and falling, as if the entire island was breathing with them, suffocating them into its depths. The shadows that once stood idle now moved, crawling across the walls and floor, bending in unnatural ways. The faceless entity had paused. For a brief moment, it was still, as though it was waiting for something to shift into place. Then the ground cracked. Not like an earthquake, not even like stone breaking. This was different. This was time splitting open. The cracks weren't just in the stone. They ripped through reality itself, causing the memories in the walls to flinch, to recoil. One of the shadows closest to them suddenly froze. Its form morphed. It shifted, and in that split second, Elise recognized it. She hadn't seen it before, but now, with terrible clarity, she realized she had. It was her, standing at the threshold of the monolith, frozen, bound by chains, her eyes wide in terror, her voice. "It finds you," she gasped, stepping back. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this can't be happening." but it was. The shadow began to mimic her perfectly, until it became her exact shape, her expression, her fear. It stepped forward, reaching toward her, the fingers stretched out as if taking her by the hand. It was her, but it wasn't. And Elise realized the truth. They had all been here before, all of them. At this moment, in this chamber, in this place, the cycle was unbroken. "This is what happens," Wendy said, her voice low and terrified. We are already trapped. We're part of the lighthouse now. The island remembers." Nolan's breathing was shallow as he backed toward the wall, eyes wide. "We have to get out of here. It's too late." But the walls weren't going to let them leave. The entity began moving again, slowly, inexorably, its faceless head tilting toward them. The shadows around the chamber thickened, taking on more human form. The room was closing in. And then, in one horrifying instant, Elise felt the presence behind her. It wasn't the entity. It wasn't the shadows. It was something else. Something far older, far deeper. She turned quickly. The monolith, still glowing faintly in the dark, had shifted yet again. The space around it had grown larger. It was no longer confined. It was growing, expanding. Suddenly she understood. The monolith wasn't a prison at all. It was a gate that was opening. The entity hadn't been trapped inside. It had been waiting for the cycle to finish. And as the entity took another step, the walls groaned, low and threatening, like the island itself was readying to collapse. The cycle was about to complete. And this time, they would never escape. The monolith's pulse resonated deep in Elise's bones. It wasn't just light. It was life, or something akin to it. The wall before them had now become a membrane, stretching and warping with each beat of the lighthouse's heartbeat. The stone around them groaned in pain, as though it had been sealed in place for centuries. And now, it could feel its chains beginning to loosen. "We can't stay here," Nolan said urgently, his eyes frantic. "The island wants us to stay." Wendy was shaking her head, her back pressed against one of the walls. "Number, we've been here before. We have." Elise turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Wendy's voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "The shadows, the broken forms, the whispers. We are the next cycle. It's us. It's always been us." But even as she spoke, Elise saw the shadows shift again, as though listening to her words. They were aware. They had always been aware. The walls were closing in, the stone pressing inward like an immense, unseen weight. The entity was closer now, its faceless head tilted at an angle, as if studying them, waiting for them to understand. Everything was part of it. The shadows, the monolith, the walls. They were one, and they were moving toward a single goal. Elise felt the chill on the back of her neck as the floor beneath her shifted, slipping out of place. A distant, gut-wrenching sound filled the air, the sound of something enormous breaking apart. The cracks that had begun in the stone now opened into large, jagged tears. And from those tears, something dark poured. It was black water, a dark, inky substance that gushed from the cracks, pooling at the feet of the entity. It was alive, and in the dim light, Elise could see it writhing, moving with a mind of its own. The entity stepped forward again, its silent face looming. It was so close now that Elise could feel the weight of its presence, suffocating. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The walls hummed with tension as the black water continued to pour in, encasing everything in its path. "We need to leave. Now!" Nolan shouted, panic creeping into his voice. But there was nowhere to go. There was no escape. The monolith began to fracture, lines running through its surface like veins. Elise's eyes widened as she realized the truth. The monolith wasn't just opening the cycle, it was completing it. The entity stepped into the growing pool of black water, its form flickering and warping like it was losing shape, dissolving into the air. But there was something worse. As it dissolved, its voice, deep, inhuman, echoed through the walls. "It is time." Elise reached out, but her hand was swallowed by the black water, as if the monolith itself was pulling her in. A vision, her own vision, flashed before her eyes. She saw herself, centuries ago, standing before this very lighthouse, eyes empty and lost, bound in chains, just as the pictographs had shown. And then she knew. The cycle was not just something they were caught in. It was something they would create. They were the cycle. Wendy screamed as the walls collapsed, the room caving in around them. And then, in the final instant, the chamber was consumed by darkness.